I asked Penny about a performance piece, Turbid Sweep, which she performed during the opening night of Materiality. The documentation is now showing at Drawspace.
So the process was basically that I started with a broom to sweep, and I'd already done a number of drawings on the floor. There's about 5 drawings that I'd already prepared. And the drawings are actually made of calcium carbonate and water, as well as salt. And I'll explain a bit later why I've used those 2 materials. But the lovely thing about these materials on this floor is that they sweep up so cleanly and so clearly. So when people arrived, I did have an assistant with me as well, my partner. And so we just waited, and I selected the time that we should intervene and work around the audience. It was a very, very busy opening night, and my task was simply to sweep up the motifs in a timely manner.
And what are these motives of?
They are diagrams that I've selected from my research into stromatolites. And stromatolites are a living rock, basically, which are a very endangered refuge. There's only about 3 left in the world. One is in Western Australia, and there are some incredible fossilised stromatolites as well in the Pilbara. 2 of those sites I did field work in. And the interest for me with stromatolites is manifold. My father was a geologist, and my children were young. We would go on family trips to see the stromatolites, and I thought that I would take it a step further and make this a basis for my thesis, which is about stratigraphic thinking. So the stromatolites are really interesting, convenient maybe in a way, because they are both geological, so they're made of sediment, and they're also biological. They're made of blue-green algae. And so the composition of them is salt, and after they've lithified, it becomes the calcinite. So I have been working a lot in terms of what it means to engage with a rock that is partly my matter and partly geological matter. So
Yeah, you call it stratigraphic thinking.
I am.
And what is stratigraphic thinking in the context of your work?
Well, what it does is it enables me to be engaged bodily. So when I work on field work, I think about field work in terms of field working. So there's quite a difference between field work as a noun and field working as a verb. So stratigraphic thinking is kind of connected to that. But it's also what I said earlier about how areas of your life become entangled personally, politically, but also as I'm very interested in feminist epistemology as well. So yeah.
And the performance night was this very crowded sort of room where you did very much entangle with the crowd, and the surfaces of it kind of became somewhat outside of your control.
Yeah.
For those of you here today, the whole floor was covered in these various motifs. So you also had your partner with you in it. You were both in boiler suits, and you'd begin the sweeping process, and your partner kind of watched very devotedly, but also in a sense kind of trying to evoke that idea of, I guess, for construction workers watching one construction worker do work, so it was that kind of like overseer sort of aspect. So I am curious about that kind of dual aspect to your performance, and how that was coordinated early on in the night, and any kind of feelings that your partner felt by the end of the night after the whole thing went through?
Yeah, I mean, his main concern was that he wasn't going to be paid, but, you know, that's just the way it goes. I think it was incredibly emotional to have him with me. I think that I asked him actually at the last moment if he would like to participate. You know, there was, from my perspective, as you can see behind you, I had the GoPro attached to my belt, and I think that the video talks a lot about that that kind of intense, very focused moment where we were both working to get the job done, which was to clean up the place, to sweep all of this into a new kind of stratigraphic, anthropocentric layer, because there's not just what's on there in there, there's actually hair and there's chips and there's whatever the night kind of presented on the floor, I swept. So it was a really difficult process to wend your way through a crowd that you know is not particularly forgiving. Although I would imagine that if you're out in the street and you were doing a performance such as this, it would be even more unforgiving. So I mean, I was pretty fortunate to have such a sympathetic crowd. But the idea of this project of sweeping through a crowd, literally, but also metaphorically, kind of talks to the idea of responsibility and care and awareness, and a deeper awareness of your surroundings. So in a way it was a site-specific work. Even though I was talking about another site, it became about that site. It became about how my feet touch this floor. And the video is very interesting because it's not a view from above. It's not like, you know, the godless view, but it is, or is it the God view? It's the God view. It is more about you being situated within me in a funny kind of weird kind of, I haven't had a chance to look at this too much, but in a weird way I see that as coming through.
What is this kind of underwater scene that ebbs and flows? Like, what is this kind of beautiful floating bits of debris and things that we're witnessing?
Yeah, well, I mean, the debris is certainly partly to do with the fact that these grow under the water, and that when you're dealing with strata flow, the currents in the waters where the stromatolites grow are very, very slow. They're very, very warm because the temperatures are very high and they're very shallow, so that the waters actually are so warm that it's only at the environment for stromatolites. So I'm really interested in this sort of stratigraphic layering in terms of matter. And I think Karen Barrard talks a lot about, you know, after all, we are all one of the same thing. We are actually matter. Yeah. So that means that the hierarchy, human-centeredness, is something that I'm trying to address by working the crowd in the performance. I'm not the focus of attention. I'm not doing the performance. I'm working with everyone, and everyone is working with me.
I think it's quite a harmonious install. Like you have the sediment of the performance. You kind of have occasional reenactments of having these motifs redone on the floor after the performance, but you've also got the broom and the video itself. But in an expanded sense to your practice, like I've visited a few times down in the studios, and it is kind of like almost like an excavation site. Like you've got a very varied element of practice. So how did you come about kind of choosing this very particular element of your practice for materiality, and what made you want to do a performance like this for the show?
It's a natural. I think it's a natural extension of what we all do in our studio spaces anyway. I'm actually quite interested in the ephemerality of it. That it's constantly moving and changing. Yeah. I mean, it's not that I'm not working with installation, but have always been interested in trying to disrupt that static nature of an exhibition or of something that's on show for others to engage with. I think on a sort of, I'm enjoying the engagement much more through the interaction of performance work. Yeah, whether it can be good or bad is fine for me.
Mm.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Penny.